Everybody, so today we are going to get into environmentalism. That's right, the fight to save the environment in the 20th century. We can make positive change, and this is going to be way more encouraging than the previous video. Okay, so environmentalism is not a new thing. In fact, guys like William Blake and William Wordsworth, famous painters and writers in England in the past, actually often spoke about trying to save the environment. William Wordsworth actually denounced industrialization as dark satanic mills that threaten green and pleasant land. So the idea that we need to kind of protect the environment is definitely something that's been around, okay? And there's lots of different groups over time, but I'm looking more kind of a modern era. But a guy that's really on the forefront of this is John Muir, famous United States environmentalist, of course, was friends with Teddy Roosevelt, who in the United States of America would really help to expand the National Park Service. And this quote by John Muir, I think, is great. With no eye to the future, these pious destroyers waged interminable forest wars, spreading ruthless devastation ever wider and further. Wilderness is a necessity, not only as foundations of timber and irrigating rivers, but as foundations for life. And I'm a big believer in this type of stuff, and I think it was really, really impressive. And the U.S. has been on the forefront of this in many cases. For instance, the very first national park was established in 1872 by the United States of America, and that is Yellowstone National Park. And that is not the first national park in the United States of America. That is the first national park in the world, based on kind of like how the modern definition of a national park is. Really, really beautiful. I'm definitely going to get out there one day. Really hope to get there, honestly, soon. Okay. But it's in the 1960s that the movement really catches on. And one of the reasons is a brilliant book by a woman by the name of Rachel Carson called Silent Spring. And Silent Spring was something that basically showed how chemicals and pesticides have basically poisoned the environment. Really focused heavily on pesticides, and as you can see, she got everybody up in arms. People tried to really discredit her and really, really go after her, but she was right. She was absolutely right. And she was a marine biologist to start, and then started to analyze this type of stuff. And this really, I think, in the modern era, kicked things off in a really, really strong way. Another group that also tried to bring awareness was the Club of Rome. They still exist today, but in 1972, they released a book called Limits to Growth. And the Club of Rome basically is like a think tank on global issues. And basically, what they were warning is how resource exhaustion can lead to the collapse of an industrial society, especially in the face of unrelenting, to quote, unrelenting and economic and population growth. And so the basic concept is how Earth is a finite system, so its resources are technically limited, and we need to develop alternatives to some of the things like fossil fuels and current farming practices to create a more sustainable living situation and achieve positive change as far as the environment is concerned. And I think that's what's really, really important. A lot of people often look at environmentalists as people that just don't care about economics or don't understand economics and development and stuff like that, and just are glorying, saving trees and stuff. And I think more people are aware of that than aren't. I think people understand that there is the need to create long-standing economic success, but at the same time, if the planet dies, it's not really going to help anything. So the Club of Rome is really trying to kind of show that if we can do this, this, and that, we can make some positive changes moving forward. But the other thing about environmentalism, I told you some big names there, but it really is a collection of grassroots movements. These are small groups of people all over the planet that are trying to make local changes. Like in the United States, the the people who lived in Love Canal, who were making the change to get the federal government to remove them because of massive chemical spills underneath where they were living. And really, it depends on where you go. And it's all over the world. And general goals are to improve the environment. And they would do things like letter writing campaigns, political parties like the Green Party, or civil disobedience and things like that. One of the older and most known ones in the modern day are the Chicpo, or the tree hugger movement, literally as you see them hugging trees there and protecting trees. They were trying to protect the livelihood of farmers and artisans and herders in areas that were experiencing deforestation. And so the idea is that they're trying to protect the trees, protect the land, to use some of these ways that we don't have to industrialize and rip everything down, that there can be ways to work together. One of my favorite is the Greenbelt movement, which is just a wonderful example of this grassroots movement that can give us success. The Greenbelt movement was created by Professor Wangari Maathai in 1977 in Kenya. And what this was basically a community-based movement. First and foremost, they were trying to plant trees in Kenya, and up to modern day, they have planted over 51 million trees. But more importantly, it was training women in forestry, food processing, beekeeping, and other trades that, one, allow them to protect and improve the environment, but two, also allow them to increase their overall economic standing. So again, this is what I was talking about, this blend of economics and protection of the environment. And Professor Wangari Maathai was awarded with the Nobel Peace Prize in the year 2004. And so again, just some really incredible things. Another great example is, eventually due to pressure, the world banned chlorofluorocarbons. Now, the problem with chlorofluorocarbons that I mentioned in my previous video is that they take a long time to get up in the atmosphere, and so it takes a while. So let's look at this. In 1971, if you look here, there's no hole in the ozone, and by 2017, we have this massive hole. But if you look at the current rate of everything's going, and it's actually going faster than this particular model will show, is that there's tons of evidence showing us right now that the ozone is actually repairing itself. And we see that in areas where, in a lot of cases in which humans remove themselves, the environment and nature over time will fix itself. So the idea is that if we can just scale some things back, that it can actually get fixed. And that's the kind of positivity that I want to show here, is that these things can indeed happen. And a lot of it has to do with our renewable resources. I have here cleaning fossil fuels. So we're using better forms of coal and oil and trying to be more efficient to have less and less emissions, using things like solar and wind power. And just some stats just to show the benefits. For instance, in Germany, the percentage of their energy that is gained from renewable sources, it went from 6.3% in the year 2000 to 32% in the year 2016. China, which has been the world's biggest polluter in the world, is actually now the biggest producer of renewable energy in the world. Countries like Brazil and Canada actually draw the majority of their electricity from hydropower instead of coal-burning plants. And many of these programs then are involved in reforestation processes, in which the planting of trees and cutting down of less land to increase the overall level of forests in the world. And this just gives you an idea of China and their overall investment in billions of dollars in renewable energy resources. So again, those are things like, basically not fossil fuels, so solar, wind, hydropower, stuff like that. And you can see it's really one of the only areas in the world in which you're seeing a sharp increase in that spending. And then we have some international agreements that give us the feel that these things can happen. Now look, both of these international agreements that I'm going to talk to aren't enforced all over the place, and certain nations have dropped out in recent years, but you have to start somewhere to make this positive change. So for instance, in 1997, you have the creation of the Kyoto Protocol. Okay, this was basically, it started between most developed nations in the West and eventually expanded up to 192 nations. This is the first type of international climate deal of its kind. The goals were basically to curb carbon emissions and reduce greenhouse gases. Now, they put out some numbers and things to do, and it went well for a little while. However, some nations were given exceptions for economic development, and some nations pulled from it. But it was this idea that there was this recognition. And that's what eventually led to the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015 with 2015 with 195 nations. Their goal was to keep the increase of global temperature to well below 2 degrees centigrade, because that's when things get bad. Basically, the nations agreed to determine, plan, and regularly report on their contributions that they're making to mitigate global warming. And really the way that you do that is finding different ways to reduce carbon from being pumped into your atmosphere. So having taxes on plants that aren't properly curbing pollution, heavy fines, investment in renewable resources, all of those things. And overall, you've actually seen a lot of success. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some nations that pulled out of it, some nations that have problems because nation A, B, and C are doing their part, but nations D, E, and F are not. But this was a big moment in the worldwide environmental movement. And I think one of the reasons why the environmental movement is having so much success now is it started off that grassroots, and it's something that everybody can kind of get behind. Sure, there are people that are going to look at economic interests first, but most of us want, blue skies, green grass. We tend to like that stuff. And so we're seeing lots and lots of positive change, and I think it's just going to get better in the future. All right, guys, so hopefully that helped kind of bring the mood up from the last video, and I will see everyone soon.